Morning, everyone. I'm Pastor John. It's great to see everybody here today. Again, I'm off center. I might preach into heresy or something if I'm not right down the center here. So just want to welcome everybody today, and we're going to finish up our series on Ruth. And it's been a story of redemption, and today is that story of the end of redemption. And I was looking up, I like to search during the week, looking at different things I'm preaching on about the story of redemption. And it seems like I typed in stories of redemption. The first thing came up was, everybody loves the story of redemption. I'm like, well, that makes good for my sermon then. Because this is a story of redemption. And what does it mean to redeem? It's something that has been lost, mortgaged, pawned, something like that is restored. Something that has lost its value by maybe it's a person, maybe something has happened in their life, maybe it's even their fault. But they are restored, redeemed, brought back. And so this is an important story. And so throughout time, if you look at movies, books, stories, things like that, a lot of them are, you're cheering at the end for the person to come back and make it, and they get to the end, it's like, oh, that's so exciting. And then when it's based on a true story, I always want to read the story of the person that actually happened in a movie or a book, and hey, what is the actual story, not just this cinemized version or whatever, because it's encouraging. And it lets you know that things can happen. And one of the definitions I also found was most of the time in redemption stories, there is a faith element. That that is a common theme because we rely on the power of God to redeem us, the power of God to change us. So we've been going through Ruth. Today's the last day. There is no Ruth book 2 that I know of, so we're done. The book of Ruth begins with a tragedy. And some of it, basically we have a time of judgment for the people of Bethlehem because they're in a famine. And we know that it's a judgment because Ruth and her family crosses the river to Moab and there's no more famine. And so this is something that God had put there. And instead of saying, hey, what should we do? How should we repent? She left with her husband, and her 2 sons went to Moab. Moab is not an area you're supposed to go to. It's an area that people from Moab are not part of the people of Israel. They're not connected with them. In fact, they're enemies of them. And so they go there, and her husband dies. Her children marry Moabite women. The Moabite women are not able to have children. And in this culture, if you do not have a male child, there is no, your line is not going on and you're going to die out. So then her sons die. And so she comes back with 2 of her daughter-in-laws, and she tells them, hey, go back to Moab. I get it. Go back, be there. And Ruth, one of the amazing stories, she looks at her mother-in-law. She says, you know what? I'm going to give up everything for you. I'm going to give up my people, my culture, my family, and I'm going to devote myself to you. And the devotion that she shows to Naomi is the fact that she says, up until the time you die, and I will be buried next to you. I will be there with you all the way till the end. And it's an amazing story of love and an example of that. So we come to the end today. We've been following along, and last week we left off, and Boaz had said that he was going to go and redeem her if he could. Ruth had made come to the threshing floor and said, I would like you to redeem me. Boaz says, I'd like to, but I can't because there's another redeemer. And in this culture, the closest relative is the one that can redeem. And what the reason for the redemption that we're going to see is that so the family line keeps going on. And so the only hope for the family line to go on, because Naomi is beyond the age of childbearing, is if Ruth has a child and they name that child after her deceased husband, and he takes on the line. And so all of this is coming together. Boaz says, I would do it. I'm so impressed by you. I really like you. I think you're great, but I have to be an honest person and go and find out this other redeemer. So that's what we pick up in chapter 4. So if we look at the first 2 verses, he says, no, Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. So he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Now, we already see God at work. Now, what's interesting about the book of Ruth, there isn't a lot of, and God did this, and then the Lord did this, and God did this. In fact, we're going to see one of the only examples at the end of this chapter where it says the Lord does this. But the first thing I want you to understand is that God is at work in redemption in this whole story. Because in Ruth 1, it says, now Boaz, he goes up to this gate. Now, this is the gate, this is the meeting spot. And he goes there and he says, I'm just going to sit down here. And behold, that just so you know, in Hebrew, that's more exciting. And behold, I can't say it in Hebrew. And behold, it's like, this is not a chance. Just happens to be that this other guy happens to be walking by. Well, how does that work? Because God is at work. How is it that Ruth went to Boaz's field? It just happened. It just happened. God is at work redeeming. God is at work. We see it right away here. And he tells this other redeemer, the one that is closer, he said, you know what? Come down, sit down next to me. I'm going to get some witness together. Basically, this becomes a courtroom scene. They're doing this legal. They're not suing each other. They're saying, we're going to have this legal, and this is how they do it in their culture. And so you look at verse 3. It says, then he said to the redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. So here's the story. He lays it out to him. He says, you know about Naomi. Now everybody knows about her. Remember, she had come, Naomi, when she came back from Moab, she was mad at God. She says, I left with a husband and 2 sons. I came back empty. I'm bitter. I'm changing my name to bitter. And that's where I'm at. I'm mad at God, even though you'd have to say, why did you go to Moab? You weren't supposed to do that. But again, God is still at work in our lives, even when we're running away. I mean, Jonah's a great example of that. I mean, it's just that God is still working in our lives in a way that we don't deserve. And Naomi, you could honestly say, well, she's not always doing everything right. But now as the story goes on, she starts to see God at work here. She starts to see this. So Naomi is well known. And she says, she came back. Now, my translation says she's going to sell her land. The problem with that, she doesn't own the land. We think what happened with Elimelech, this is a Hebrew word that nobody saw they translate differently, but Elimelech, when he was in Bethlehem, which was the city of bread, if you came to our night in Bethlehem, you knew that because we had bread. But next year you can come. Now again, she doesn't own it, okay, because she can't own anything. Elimelech sold the land to get the money. That was his last gasp attempt. And also widows at this time don't get the land when it's passed down to them. So it's very important that you see this, that she doesn't, so the word for selling there, it's kind of an interesting word. She says, I need somebody to redeem it. I need somebody to fix this for me. And so Boaz tells this guy, and what's interesting about this man, do you see his name? There's no name for him. And what we're going to see about that is because his name is not mentioned because he doesn't do what is right and he's not remembered. But Boaz is. And so we just say the person, the redeemer, he says, you know what? In the presence of everybody, you redeem the land. And he's thinking to himself, I could use some more land. Not a bad thing. Now he has to buy that land, just for the record. He's not buying it from Naomi, he's buying it from the person who bought it from her. And so he says that he would do it, and he says, if you won't do it, I will, Boaz says. So that's what it moves on. So the man just simply says, I'll do it. But then Boaz comes up and he says, now there's a different part about this. Now here's something that's interesting. It says in verse 5, the day you buy from the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead, his inheritance. So what he says to him, by the way, is there's a little catch to this. You also get a wife. Now, what's interesting about this is a challenge by Boaz, but the actual verse in Deuteronomy that talks about this only says that their brother has to continue the line. And what's interesting about this, we've talked about this whole concept of redeemers, is you had to marry the widow, have a kid, name the kid after the deceased brother, and then that person would have the inheritance, and you wouldn't have the inheritance. That kid becomes your brother's kid, even though your brother is dead. And so it's a lot to ask. And now he's saying, you know what? In the presence of these witnesses, I say to you, take Ruth also. But he doesn't have to. But in this culture, it's all about your name. It's all about your reputation. And just for the record, Boaz lays it out a little bit here. He goes, Ruth, the Moabite. I added that part, but it's really like he's, you know those Moabites. And you have to understand that this would be a negative thing. He uses her full name, not like Ruth, a really great woman, man, you'd want to marry her. He doesn't say that. He doesn't want to make a sale here. He said, no, don't do it. But he says, you're going to have to do this. And you're going to have to take and you're going to have to perpetuate his name. The name of her husband, which hasn't been named yet, but you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to take this. And that kid is not going to be your own. It's going to be the deceased man's kid. And so then what does the Redeemer say? Again, we don't know his name. In verse 6, he says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right hand of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now, there's a lot of things in there. You can say, I cannot. All right? What that really means is, I don't want to. All right? Just be honest. Because the big words that stand out when you look at it is, for myself, because redeeming requires a person going above and beyond for somebody else. Ruth went above and beyond for her mother-in-law. Naomi went above board for her daughter-in-law when she says, I want you to be secure. I want you to have what you need. And so she's looking at this concept and it requires that. And we're starting to see the elements here of the true Redeemer we have in God. That God goes beyond what we deserve. It's not for himself. Because if you totally look at this selfishly, just for the record, you may kind of pick on the Redeemer here and say, well, he's kind of a jerk and he doesn't know. What he's being asked to do is to marry a woman that for 10 years could not have a kid. Maybe she has a kid. He has to spend money on a piece of land that's not going to be his. It's going to be the kid's land. If he doesn't have another kid, he has to spend this money. That kid gets his land and the other land, and his line goes away. But besides that, nothing. So he's taking a chance. But he says, I don't want to impair my own inheritance. I'd rather hold on to what I have. I don't want this. And we just have to understand that God is the example that we need to hold up, where God redeems us, not because it was easy for him. Not because it was something that he did without having to step out. We didn't deserve it. He stepped out and said, I will send my only son for you to redeem you, even though you're the ones, I gave you this beautiful garden, and you decided, no, we'd rather touch and eat the fruit. We'd rather do it on our own. But he steps out for us. And the example we start to see is the contrast between this. So now there was a custom in former times, it says in verse 7, concerning redeeming and exchanging. Now, you can tell that this is written a few years after this, because he says, to confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Now, Troy gave me a flip-flop. Pastor Troy, I don't think this is legally binding, just for the record, but yeah, it has to be a real sandals. But this is the example that we have. So you basically hand it, and then you'd walk around. So we both have it right here. So Troy and I would have a union, and well, I'd have to have one I give to you, Pastor Troy. So then, but we would have to say, look, and if Pastor Troy says, I didn't do it, I'd say, got your sandal, okay? Or your flip-flop. See, it doesn't really work, but. The advantage here, so the whole concept is that he has this thing, and it's all being drawn in there. And people are like, yeah, we used to do that in the old days. This is like going to the Historical Society, and they say, yeah, we used to make our own butter and do all this stuff. That's what he's trying to say. That's what they used to do. So what is Boaz's response? Look at verse 9. He said to the elders and all the people, the witnesses, he said, all that were watching, He said, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi that all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. And Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, so that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. So Boaz declares. Now Boaz, again, is stepping above and beyond his duty. He put a challenge out there. He says, I will take on Ruth, and I am taking a chance by doing this. I'm having to purchase the land and marry a woman that was not able to have kids, so we don't even know what age she would be. It's probably not as easy at this time for her to have kids. I don't know how this is going to work. She may have one kid. I may lose everything on this, but I think she's worth it. And that's the example of somebody that's a redeemer. That's the example that's being carried through in this whole story, is this is the standard that is set. Somebody that looks out for another person. And he says, I'm going to take Ruth the Moabite. He uses the term Moabite. Now, a lot of people are like, well, why would he use that? And then we finally find out that which kid she was married to in Mahlon. And he says, I have bought her to be my wife. Now, again, the term is not bought. I've redeemed her so she can be my wife. I have made this happen. This is very clear to me. And he says, I'm doing it proudly because Ruth the Moabite is no longer the same woman that came here. And the same woman that came here is the woman that went from Ruth the Moabite, like, again, we have to understand how bad that is. And she went to a servant, to a maidservant, to somebody. Now she's going to be a wife. And we're going to see it doesn't stop here. He says, I am proud to have her because of the kind of woman she is. What a story of redemption for Ruth. When Ruth was born in Moab, she's probably like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to Israel and be a big shot there. I don't think that that's what she was looking for. But God has plans for us. God has redeeming plans for us, and he carries us through. And he says, I'm going to make sure that her name, that the name of Mahlon and the name of Elimelech do not die. Because the worst thing that could happen in this culture was that you lose your name, that nobody ever mentions your name again, and you lose this. I was talking about this earlier, but the concept of, how some people say, well, that's the Johnson land over there. Or I always say, when do I get to be old man Hubert that lives on the end of the road? They always have that. Well, don't go by old man Hubert's house. Maybe I'm already there. I don't know. But they always have those places that you go, and it's like, that's that person's land. We don't have that as much in America, but sometimes we have that, where people have had the same house that's been passed on from family to family and things like that. But in this culture, the land and the name, you had to have an person to have the land because that was a gift from God. It had to stay into the land. And so you had to redeem the land. When Elimelech sold that land, somebody had to go back and buy it back so it could be brought back to the proper name. That was incredibly important in this culture. But on top of that, you had to have your name continue. The only way you could do that was to have a son. And he says, I'm willing to do all of this for Elimelech. And I am taking a shot that this is all going to turn out bad for me. This could all go bad for him. He could do all of this for Ruth. He could do all this for Naomi. And he could be, the other Redeemer was not wrong when he said, this is going to jeopardize my own inheritance. But that's the case of what we start to see about the nature of God and why Ruth is such a great example, because she looks at Naomi and says, I'm willing to put it all on the line for you. I'm willing to put away my desires. I'm not looking out for me. I'm looking out for you. And that's the true example. And so the public outcry, this is where it gets a little crazy, just for the record, because we got Ruth the Moabite. I know I'm going to say that over and over again, but maybe someday we'll figure it out. Ruth the Moabite's bad, okay? And you would just say this, and all the people at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthy in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. Ruth, the Moabite, becomes a servant, becomes a maidservant, becomes a wife, now she's with Rachel and Leah, who are the mothers of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's a redemption story. That's huge. And we're like, well, no, they're a big deal. The people in the town are like, this woman is so amazing. We want her to be at that level. We think she's that kind of quality of a person. You are getting a great thing here, and this is what we think of her. And may you act worthily and be renowned. May the name be known. May for years to come, people be talking about Boaz. May they be talking about Ruth. Guess what? We're talking about Ruth, we're talking about Boaz, and we're going to talk about the kid. And many more we're going to see later. And so then they bring up Perez. And you say, who is this person? Well, okay, let's put it this way. If you were going to make a movie out of this story, it would be rated R. And, okay, basically, this whole story is Perez comes from a relationship where a brother died, and then, according to Deuteronomy, the one brother was killed by God because he was such a jerk. And then they sent another brother in. That brother decided he didn't want to do his husbandly duties and give a son to he was killed. And then the next brother, Judah said, well, I'm not going to give him another brother because I can't lose another one. And so then she's like, what am I supposed to do? So she dresses up like a prostitute and entices Judah to come sleep with her and gets pregnant. It's a nice story. I'm just saying, it's nice. I'm surprised it's not in every Sunday school curriculum. But, for all the kids with little flannel graphs and stuff like that. But anyways, the whole concept here is, may your house be like, and you're like, why would you say that person? Why would you bring up that story? Well, this is the land of Judah, the tribe of Judah, the clan. This is the clan came from Perez. And that's their ancestor. And they say Perez actually turned out that there were twins that were born from this illicit union between Judah and his daughter-in-law. And God used that horrible situation to do amazing things. And he says, if God can do that with people that you think to yourself, what were you thinking? How much more can God do something with good people like Ruth and Boaz? That's what they're trying to say. They're saying, man, we saw what he did with Perez. Wow, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be way better. And said, because the offspring that the Lord will give you, they even acknowledge in verse 12, it's almost like a prayer. This is something that God needs to do. Why do they say that? Well, Ruth had been married for 10 years and did not have children. Okay? It wasn't like they weren't trying to have children. It was very important in this culture. So they said it's going to take God to act on behalf. And if he could act through Judah and Tamar, if he could act through that, how much more can he act through these two? So we see the end of the story in verse 13. Now Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. As may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. Then the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And I'm not going to read the next part because I'm just going to stumble through all the Hebrew names. But honestly, I just want to skip to the end. Because Obed, the son, becomes David. Now, when I say Moabite, that's the negative. David's like, what? Okay, when you say David, everybody's like, to this day, if you go to Israel, on the flag of Israel has King David on it. Today, he's still a big deal today. That's how big David is. So out of this story that you were following along, we're like, oh, this is a nice little story. And whoa, this is David's line? This is that? How big a deal is this? This is God's plan to bring David about. And that just shows you that God is working in this whole case. If you look at the verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He went into her. If you don't know what that means, ask your parents. And the Lord gave her conception. Okay, the Lord gave her conception. There's the key word there. Remember what they said earlier? The Lord will give you a child. Guess what the Lord did? This is one of the only times in the book of Ruth where it distinctly says, I know I've been subtle about this, but I might need to bat you over the head with this. God did this. You see God at work here. God says, I'm going to give you a kid. I'm going to make that line. Now, Naomi was worried about the line of Ruth. She was worried about Ruth's security. She's all worried about Ruth. And now this whole story is about how good it was for Naomi. You see in verse 14, they're saying, blessed be they're praising the women are praising who has not left you without a redeemer, has not left you without somebody who's going to carry on your name. Your name is going to be known. Your name will be renowned in all of Israel. And boy, does she have no idea, and neither do these ladies. They're like, it's going to be great. People will talk about Obed, and he might have some kids, who knows? Or he might be the grandfather of King David, who led to somebody else we're going to talk about in a minute. But it's like the whole story is like, you have this amazing story. And now this, I think a lot of people in our day would not take this well. But verse 15 also gives the other things. He shall be a restorer of life and a nourisher for your old age. It talks about a nourisher of your gray hair. I love that. And it just says you're going to have something good in spite of your gray hair. It's going to restore your life. Remember, she said, bitter. I'm not happy about life, and God has taken everything away. Your life has been restored. You have hope now. And the reason why that is because some crazy Moabite woman named Ruth loved you. Some person. Now, it should have been the other way around. Do you understand that God told Moses to tell the people, make sure you take care of foreigners and be nice to them and love them? And Ruth is like, well, I can be a foreigner and I can love you. She just twists it right back on him. And they said, we've never seen love like this in our lives. And in fact, the commentaries I was reading this week, they said that the example of Ruth is probably the greatest example of love, showing godly love to somebody in the entire Old Testament. She is the standard that is set. And so you have this love. And here's the part that I think that some people would say, it's better than having 7 sons. Now, I didn't have 7 sons, and I'm kind of happy about that. Because a lot of people would be like, I don't want 7 kids. But some people would. But understand, the ideal family in ancient Near East Israel was 7 kids, and especially 7 sons. That was the ideal. And everybody wanted it. You know, it's like, oh, you got to have 7. Oh, you only have 6 kids? Ooh, we'll keep praying for you. You're going to have that 7th one. Come on. So he's saying it's better. You said you lost everything. You lost your husband and your 2 sons. You have Ruth and a child that's better than 7 sons. Better than the ideal in that life. And so then Naomi took the child, embraced him, put him next to her, and we see that she now has hope. She now has the restorer. She puts in her bosom, which is a term that can be used for man and woman, but this time just holds him close to her and becomes the one who takes care of him. And she finds life and hope through him. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name. Now, it doesn't say they actually named him. They agreed with the name of Obed, okay? And that is one who serves. And they said, does that mean he serves God or he serves Naomi? Both. Yes. But here's the important thing to understand. Obed fathers Jesse, Jesse fathers David, and what was the other prayer? His name will be known forever. His name is known forever. And it gets better than David. Because you might have heard about a month ago, if you were reading through the book of maybe Matthew or something, or Luke, and you saw the line of Jesus, and you might have seen these characters we were just talking about. These are the ancestors of Jesus. This is the situation. God was working all this many, many, many years before Jesus. So they're like, may your name be renowned in Israel. Oh, you got David. That's awesome. You have no idea. It gets better than that. God had a plan the whole time to bring this. And he used a Moabite woman who probably, he looked around, he says, I can't find an Israelite that's going to pay attention, so I'm going to have to go to Moab. And I'm going to have to grab her because she's the best one that I can find. She comes and shows better love than they ever seen before. She's the example, like, she's like Rachel and Leah. What? She's amazing. And her love is better than 7 sons. And you're like, how can that even be? But now that name is carried on. And to this day, whenever you read the genealogies, and I know you guys for your devotional, you're like, get me some genealogy action. That gets me going. But if you read the genealogies in the New Testament, you'll see these people. Because God had a plan of redemption. God has a plan to redeem you. God has a plan to redeem Israel. God has a plan to redeem his church. He's always at work, whether we know it or not, whether we deserve it or not, because he's the ultimate redeemer that comes from this. Why don't you stand with me today? For our prayer ministers to come forward. If you're here today and you've never accepted Christ, you've never made him the master of your life, today is the day to do that. He is the true redeemer. He is the one that can take your life and restore what we have all thrown away by sin. And just come and talk to our prayer ministers, and you can do this. If you need someone to pray with you, we have prayer ministers available to pray with you today. Lord, we come before you. We are in awe, God, of your plan. Your plan to use people, God, that don't necessarily fit the mold. You use the foreigner instead of the native Israelite. You use the second redeemer, not the first redeemer. You used even a Perez and Judah, and you use all these things, God, for your good. And that lets us know, God, that you're on our side, even when we're not always doing what is right. You are redeeming us. You are restoring us. And Lord, if that can happen when we're not following you, like with Boaz and Ruth, when we are following you, how much amazing things can happen for that. Lord, we thank you for your redemption. We thank you for this story and example, God. And Lord, let us be a people of redemption for other people. Let us look out for others in front of ourselves. In the name of Jesus, amen. Now go and bring the kingdom of God to our community.